For early access to more videos like this, plus exclusive content, community discussions, and more, become a patron at patreon.com/BrucePoinsett.
What's going on? It's Bruce, and today we're talking about how to spot DEI grifters. So, as you can see, I'm going to make a lot of friends with this video. Anyways, so let's talk a little bit about the situation. So, especially in places like the suburbs, predominantly white suburbs, they're a fertile ground for grifts or, cons, slightly deceitful, deceitful ways about going about this. Why is that? Well, first off, in a lot of these places, there's the claim that diversity is a quote unquote new conversation. So what they mean is that people of color have been complaining for years about the racism, but in 2020, 2019, 2018, people decided to take it seriously. So what happens in this is you usually get a little groundswell of protest in the community, and then the institutions, so the local government, the police department, school districts, et cetera, they start feeling some kind of pressure to respond because the status quo is clearly no longer acceptable. But they also have this conflict where they don't actually want things to fundamentally change. They just, they want to show that they're responding, that they're listening, So what happens is if you come in and you can speak the language of DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion, while also protecting the power structure, these institutions will give you the world, all the praise you want, contracts, job opportunities, everything. And the best part, because it's a new conversation in town, most of the community is not going to question this. They don't understand the nuances. They don't understand the business practices, the ethics of DEI. In fact, just the mere presence of someone speaking the DEI language in, a public space is considered a radical upgrade. And in this sense, the fact that, for years or decades, that the city and the society have conditioned you to, put the bar so low ends up becoming a success in itself, even at times where you are, forced into taking the minorest or making the minorest of changes, or the most minor of changes, I should say. It's, it can be frustrating, but let's get into why. Yes. So let's talk about DEI grift. So first off, why are grifters such a problem? Well, at the outset, they stunt progress. Usually the grifters come in once the community has already decided they've had enough. So what you get when the grifter comes in is this person who, again, uses the language of DEI, paints themselves as the allies, an agent of change, but what they really do is they're on the inside and they help actually increase institutions' ability to push back against progressive measures. They often normalize what is a very watered down version of anti-racism. So, the lowest common denominators, the recognizing bias, the, even like, you might not even get to white fragility, just simply saying, oh, racism is bad and we should talk about it. They hit that checkpoint, and then because you're talking, everyone's taking it seriously, and it looks like these institutions have done something. And in some cases, like when these grifters get into positions of, power, whether it's elected or otherwise, then you're talking about the institutions actually investing real resources, contracts, time into these grifters, which makes it much harder to get rid of them. Because again, you're not just fighting with the grifters themselves, you're fighting with institutions that have made an investment in them. So why else are they such a problem? Unfair contracting, which thankfully does not always happen, but is often a sign of this, where the grifter comes into a place, especially a place where the conversation is new, and they're able to give this idea that they're the best thing since sliced bread, because the community is so starved. And what they do is, one, they lessen the value of the work. So they give you this watered down version, and chances are they're probably able to sell it at a lower price because it is watered down, but that becomes the standard. And furthermore, they also shut out diverse voices in the worst case scenarios, when a city decides, hey, or city government, I should say, decides, we're really comfortable, we like this person, they speak the language, but they also make us feel comfortable. So we're going to make sure that person does all the talks, all the discussions, all the events, everything we can put this person in, we're going to put them there. And what you get, unfortunately, is just that person and just that voice. Even if this was, even if you're talking about someone who's not a grifter, someone who's the greatest, advocate, educator, organizer ever, you need a diversity of voices. You need to actually speak to the community and the diversity in the community and their experiences. So again, there are often times, if the goal is to maintain the status quo, you put one person in, shut out everyone else, and say that this person speaks for the community. And lastly, it manufactures this idea that it's the best we can afford, again, because the community is so starved for it. Lastly, grifters are a problem because they also further this marginalization and gaslighting of people of color. Again, because if you put someone and you prop them up to a community that doesn't know better as someone who speaks for the community or someone who is this expert, then the institutions can come back to the people who are protesting, who caused the outrage in the first, or who, caused the city, caused the school district, caused the police department, caused the Chamber of Commerce to have to do something in the first place. That institution then comes and says, well, we got this person, we got this expert, so why are you complaining? And of course, the grifter, that person, they are going to, and we'll get into this a little later in the discussion, they gaslight these people. And then the community itself, again, because they don't know better, this is the best they've seen because the bar is so low. So even if you try and question it with the rest of the community, they'll come back and say, but this person's so nice, but this person's so great, what are you talking about? And all these, all these old talking points and all these things where they try and paint us as too sensitive, or we're just always talking about race. You get those same tropes even from the people who are supposed to be your allies. So how do we spot DEI grift? And it should be important to note that in the next slide, none of the following are reasons to immediately, cast doubt on someone. You should, be patient and considerate in your moves. So observe patterns and provide opportunities to do better, in personal conversation, which again, we'll get into later. Talk with others in the community and see if they're experiencing these same issues. And after you've, observed, you've talked with the person, or you've reached out and provided feedback, you've talked with the community, and, your feedback gets rebuffed, or the community's feedback gets rebuffed. And you see that this person that you suspect might be a grifter is just continuing to abuse the community's trust with no accountability, then consider organizing and taking action. But first, let's get to some red flags. So this is not a complete list, but just a few things that make it easy. Let's talk about first, rugged individualism, a lack of verifiable qualifications, demonstrable bias in favor of white consumers slash participants, a pattern of overtly manipulative behavior, and then everyone's favorite, dirty business practices. So first, let's talk about rugged individualism. This is when you notice a person position themselves as a sole expert, and when there are opportunities to collaborate or communicate or engage with other people, especially other marginalized people in the community, they reject that in favor of propping themselves up, both whether it's to you, but especially to other consumers in the community. And they also tend to promote a very exclusively, or I should say exclusively promote this very individualistic and often hyper-capitalist, means as the only path to liberation and the path to progress. So you can learn it, it's your, and this is not to say, obviously, inner growth is important, is essential to this work. There's community organizing, and then there's also the personal work we have to do. But when people only promote the personal work, or only say that, well, none of this community stuff matters, none of this other stuff, I have no responsibility to anyone else but myself, and neither should you, that should be a red flag. Let's go to lack of verifiable qualifications. So when a lot of people think about qualifications, they think about degrees, they think about certificates. I would contend that certificate and degrees don't mean much on their own. Like, you can go to a place and you can go to a fancy school, you can go through this, renowned program, but if all you have is a piece of paper, all that tells me is you went there. What I want to know is, what did you do when you were there? What did you accomplish? Who did you work under? And how do they speak on their experience with you? How do they speak of your work? At the end of the day, how do we know you will be responsive and, more importantly, effective for marginalized communities, especially when it's our trauma that these DEI initiatives and these programs are built upon? That's what's important. So when we look at qualifications, a lot of people in this industry are now saying, as opposed to looking at your degree or certificate, they're looking at, again, who have you worked under? Have you done an apprenticeship with someone? Have you worked with this organization that's, been able to accomplish these things that have actually served and helped the community? And do they speak well of you? That's what we look for. So when people do the shortcuts, especially with these hiring processes, because you get, one, that it's confidential, but then two, you have these backroom places where the people doing the hiring have no idea what they should be looking for, and they default to a certificate or a degree. And what you get is, again, someone maybe who can speak the language, but they're not actually qualified to do the work. Now let's talk about demonstrable white bias. So again, we live in the US. It's a majority white country. I operate in Oregon, so it's a very, very, very wide area. And most of the spaces I'm in, especially these DEI conversations, is going to be a majority white room. So does that mean that you have some, as a facilitator, does that mean you have to appeal to the majority? I don't think so. I think you should be appealing to justice and equity. So that means, a lot of these cases, if you want to spot someone who's doing this in a questionable way, notice how they react to white fragility. If they, if they bend to it, if they let that dictate the program, you might have a problem. Likewise, if you notice that they treat people of color more harshly for violating the group rules. You know, I remember being in a discussion group, or we'll call it a discussion group, where, the, the whole thing was, don't tell a story. You got to speak, are you telling a story? Are you speaking facts? You're speaking this thing. And the facilitator, I noticed, like, if, you make a comment based on assumption, he's going to tell you you're telling a story. But I have a white person say, oh, you just don't do this because you don't like this because I'm white, or you don't respect my perspective because I'm white, and the facilitator wouldn't say anything. I call out, a bias that I see, and suddenly, Bruce, you're telling the stories. Are you saying, and redirect. You notice that pattern over time, and you're like, but wait, this person's supposed to be the bias expert. How does that work out? Likewise, when you see things like clear microaggressions or clear overt racism, but you notice that this person's going out of their way to not call it out, even though when we're talking about the issue of racism and in the context, especially in these predominantly white places, we're talking about white supremacy. If you are not tackling those things while positioning yourself, or not at least calling them out, and we're not having a discussion, you're avoiding that while positioning yourself as an expert, all that tells me is that you're more concerned with the comfort of the white people in the room than the actual work. And that, to be fair, especially in these places where it's a quote unquote new conversation, a lot of people will settle for that. And that'll be fine for a lot of people, and they'll keep bringing you back. But it also, if you're a person of color in these spaces, that is mentally harmful. Not to mention harmful to the work itself. So again, if you're positioning yourself as an expert while simultaneously harming the people whose trauma this work is built upon, you might be a grifter. So let's talk about dirty business practices. And this is admittedly a trickier area because we don't all get the training. And sometimes people's bad business practices are for a lack of experience that they still need to be held accountable for, because pay people, but these can be, again, a possible red flag that you might be dealing with a grifter. So as we talked about before, is this person monopolizing contracting? Are they, or people on their behalf shutting out other people who should be competing for contracts and jobs in this area? And are they shutting out diverse voices that would be more responsive to the diverse people that make up the community? These things happen, and in general, and just in terms of business practice in general, they're unethical. But then in terms of the DEI work, they can be even more harmful. And then there's other stuff that where it gets even trickier, but a little bit shadier, is like the Amazon practice, for example, of selling your products so low with the intent that, you can do it because you can afford it, and it prices other people out who would be your competitors. Like, again, it's a tricky area because there are a lot of people who provide free services for the ability to make it accessible to the community. And there are other people who are definitely providing business and promotional services, and while doing it, however, at the expense of other voices. Again, this is a trickier, grayer area, but you have to look at the total. Is this person, because people can be providing free shows or free discussions, but they're paying diverse speakers to come and talk to you? Or is this person just lowballing for their own benefit? You got to take it all into account. And then lastly, just a pattern of overtly manipulative behavior. So again, are you gaslighting, people who may call your ethics into question or call your practices into question? Are you just straight up lying? You know, we have a grifter literally at the highest level of office right now in the country. And you see someone who's just a pathological liar. And then my favorite is cult leader tendencies. So, people, and this can get difficult because if you start seeing where this person develops a following, but that following is on some, this person can do no wrong. We follow this person wherever they go. And you start, seeing maybe that's being abused, or even just the setup of it in general. Like that should set off some red flag. That should set, again, in itself, maybe not, but again, you have to look at it and say, is this person using, their powers of the DEI language and, the aesthetic of justice to manipulate people, to sort of build a cult, basically. So what can we do? I think first, provide feedback. Start privately. These people provide, avenues, whether it's their number, their email, maybe they want to meet, to talk. Use those avenues for feedback and tell them, if you've noticed issues and noticed problems, and provide opportunities. Like if you have suggestions for doing better, provide them, look them up, like give people opportunities to do the right thing. I think empathy is very important. And we live in a society where, where a lot of these bad habits, a lot of these toxic practices are normalized. We're socialized into them. So of course we're going to take them on. Of course we're going to, it more than likely, we think, I shouldn't say more than likely, but there's a lot of times where we do think this is okay because we don't know better, or we haven't been given a real opportunity to do better. So before we're out here, looking for grifters with our pitchforks, be empathetic of that. But, provide those opportunities to do better, have those lines of dialogue. But then sometimes you do that and you get nowhere, and you see that the issue is still going. And again, this person is materially hurting the work. And then sometimes that means you might have to provide some public feedback. It could be a social media post. It could be a letter to the editor to your local paper. You could testify to city council or school board or any other one of these places that provides public testimony. Maybe you even need to lead a public demonstration. Again, you gotta think about it like this. Where are people listening? It changes from different places. So, for example, where I do a lot of organizing work in Lake Oswego, the community newspaper, the Lake Oswego Review, is very widely read. It's very, it's not the case in a lot of places. A lot of people do not respect their newspapers like that. But for whatever reason, in LO, they really, really pay attention to the Review. So if you get a letter to the editor or an op-ed in the Review, that's a great way to reach people. But whatever it is, the rule of thumb should be find out where the people are and then go to speak to them there. And then also seek out and engage with people doing the work the right way. And, there's a bunch of ways, attend different events, attend demonstrations, talks, facilitated discussions, workshops. And, some things may work, some things may not work. Keep observing, and you find people, you find organizations whose work you respect, whose work is ethical, and effective, you know, follow them. Follow them on social media. Join the email list. You know, get involved if you want to. And start taking on, you know, start really studying what they do. Start studying best practices in general, and then promote them to people. Educate your community about how, you know, how these best practices work, so they too can see, oh, this way we've been accustomed to, or this new thing that we're excited about isn't as good as it can get. Open people's eyes up to the possibilities of what can be done. Show them examples. Like, we can sit here and complain all day about what's going wrong, but if you don't give people, you know, something to work with on how to do things better, then you're going to be in the same place. And when you find people, when you find practitioners who are doing things the right way, who are engaging, who are genuine, you know, seek out opportunities to engage your community with them. So maybe bring them in. If you can bring them in as a speaker, if you can bring them in as a facilitator, if you can share their work with people in your community, have discussions about it, whatever it may be. But just, if you want to get rid of grift, open people's eyes up to the real thing. And then lastly, you know, look for opportunities to put these people in positions of real power and change. So make recommendations. There's, you know, a job opening, recommend that person. There's, you know, contract opportunities, recommend these people. If, you know, there are openings on boards and commissions, maybe recommend these people. Although I will say, because we often, as someone who gets tapped all the time for volunteer boards and commissions, it can, I would say, tread a little bit more lightly and be very purposeful, because I personally start getting the idea when I'm tapped for all these things, like, do you not have any, you know, other Black friends? Maybe someone else that just might speak to this, because you can't keep tapping me forever. I'm not sure what you expect. So be wary of, you know, people's lows, be wary of their interests. There's some people who, yeah, it's volunteer time, but, you know, it works for them. It is what they want to do, or it serves an interest for them, while also allowing them to serve the community in a genuine way. But again, tread a little lighter, be a little bit more intentional, because God knows we don't, you know, just openly, you know, treating people, especially Black people, as the mules of social justice work is not cool. So now some final thoughts. Grift can be demoralizing, especially like if you're in an area where you've started the work, you're making progress, and then some grifter comes into a position of power and presents this new obstacle. It sucks. It really sucks. And they'll test your patience. They will mislead people. And worst of all, because everyone wants it to be easy. Everyone wants a single, you know, identifier. You know, everyone wants to come at like a Robin DiAngelo or something, be like, well, you're white and you're saying this stuff. You can't be right. It's gotta be something up. Or you're this, so you can't be. The reality is grifters come in all nationalities, backgrounds, genders, sexual orientations, shapes, sizes, you know, abilities, disabilities, you know, any background, any identifier you can think of. You know, it's as diverse as the rest of the world. And even more complicated, some people teeter on the border. Maybe they're not full blown grifters when you meet them, or maybe they're, you know. So how do you judge that? How do you deal with that? Like, you might meet someone, and, you know, I'm a big Batman fan, so You might meet them as Harvey Dent, but then maybe 3 years later, maybe 3 weeks later, that person might be Two-Face. So it can be a lot, but one thing to just remember, just be disciplined and seek out, again, people who are doing it the right way. Build networks with them, build relationships, build, support groups. So especially so you're not fighting these things alone. And so you have people you can put out there, whole groups of doing the work the right way. That is how you fight this. You go out there isolated. I'll tell you right now, the grifter will use the institutions and the community against you as their word versus yours. And they will say in a calm voice that you are out of control and you may not win that. So I don't say that to discourage you. I just say that to, again, encourage you to be disciplined. And to be clear, don't go out there, hunting for grifters. Don't be out here thinking you have to protect your social justice territory like the troll guarding the bridge. Please, please, please don't do that, because oftentimes that makes it worse. The overprotective person is like, oh, everyone, you must be an agent because you're not like my group. Like, when you talk about things that tread onto the aforementioned, cult-like stuff, that's where we go with that. So finally, just be vigilant. Move the right way. Support others who are moving the right way. And in total, just do your part to, create the environment we want to live in, to create an atmosphere where values and ethics, or that values and rewards ethics. It's that simple. So again, thank you for listening to, again, this video that I'm sure will make a number of friends among people who thought, who were carving up all the suburbs in Oregon and throughout the country and thinking, yeah, we got this one. But you gotta do what you gotta do. So catch you on the next video. Take care, everyone.